Feel free, Heather.
Okay.
Thank
I will
you.
just go then.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So just to clarify where you're at right now, you are in the Having Difficult Conversations workshop with myself. My name is Heather Hudson. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I currently have my own practice. Lighthouse Counseling is the name of my practice. But prior to starting my own private practice, I worked for 13 years, 14 years in the healthcare setting. So I've worked in inpatient hospital, I have done home health and hospice, so I have a lot of these difficult conversations. And no two are alike. So this is a very generalist overview of what some of these conversations may look like and how to approach some of these conversations, but it is in no way specific. I will have some questions.
Coming.
It's on my computer, so if nothing else. Oh,
Hang on.
okay.
I'll click for you. Just a second.
It may time out or something too. So I will preface this by saying this is the first presentation of this type I've ever done. I told Dana somehow I made it all the way through school. I think that kind of ages me a little bit without ever doing a PowerPoint. And I have skipped through any sort of presentation I've ever done without doing a PowerPoint. So, sorry, it's very basic. There's no flashing lights and dancing people or anything. But, so the first thing is, what is a difficult conversation? And this is a caregiving conference. So I looked at issues that impact caregivers, things that you have to have conversations with your loved ones. So money related. A lot of times if you're the child of someone you're caring for, it's hard to talk to your parents about money. They're very personal about it. In my family, we were taught, there are certain things you don't talk about. You don't talk about money. You don't ask mom and dad how much money they make. So that's a touchy subject. Staying at home. Is it safe to stay at home? Do you have hiring help? I mean, these two kind of go together. Is it safe to stay at home? And if you stay at home, do we need to hire help? A lot of people do not want strangers in their homes. I hear that over and over again. I don't want to let those strangers in my home. Even if it's a licensed, bonded, insured place, I don't want strangers in my home. Personal care and hygiene. For those of you who are doing caregiving, personal care and hygiene is a big deal. People are not able to perform the hygiene they once were able to perform. So a lot of times, the laundry, they're wearing the same outfit day after day after day. It's starting to look dirty. I know in my personal life it became an issue when my husband's grandfather was showing up at church as an elder of the church with stains on his clothes. And somebody needs to talk to him about that. Who wants to do that? That's embarrassing. And then of course there's the smells too, of not being able to clean. So personal care and hygiene is another issue. Driving. A lot of people think end-of-life issues are probably the most difficult issue to talk to. Statistics and research shows it's driving. People will avoid the driving conversation like the plague. So we will talk a little bit more in detail about driving, but as kind of the hardest conversation. Why are they so difficult? Well, they're confrontational. And when I say confrontational, I don't mean conflictual, like, hey, mom and dad, this is what you're going to do, and you're going to do it like I want to do it. Actually, that's the exact opposite way you should have these conversations. But they're confrontational because you have to confront your own stuff as well as the stuff with your mom and dad or your loved one, whoever you're having a conversation with, your spouse, your loved one, whomever. I think parents, because that's kind of where I'm at, but everybody's in a different place. They make us uncomfortable, and again, that's with the confrontational. We have to look at our own stuff, and if we're children having to confront this, we are telling the people who've always told us what to do, we're suddenly giving them advice. There's role reversal. And these conversations make us vulnerable. It's very emotional. It's very emotional to go in and say, hey, I don't think you can live by yourself anymore. I'm concerned that things aren't getting done. I'm concerned that you're not doing well. And there's heartbreak for us there too. And a lot of times we don't want to show our emotion. So they do make this helpful. And there are several reasons why these are. Can you guys think of a reason why these conversations are so difficult that I don't have listed here? I'm kind of an interactive person, so feel free to interact with me.
Well, in my family, I'm maybe like a little bit like yours, we grew up, you just don't talk about anything really important with your parents at all, like my whole life. Nothing important, nothing good, nothing bad. It's always weather, school, surface things.
Yes.
And so now suddenly, not only are you talking about something difficult, you're actually talking about something important.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just really not what I'm used to, or what they're used to.
Exactly. And I see that over and over in my practice too, particularly children coming to me saying, I want more than anything to have that talk with my dad. What if my dad dies next week and I've never heard that I'm proud of you? Or I've never been able to tell him that I love him. And I mean, months and months and months go by and they'll come into my office and I'll be like, so did you talk to your dad yet? No. What are you scared of? That's just not the way we operate. So yeah, they're very hard. I love this comic. It's the elephant in the room. And we're scared of the elephant in the room. So this is, our little therapist. And I don't know if you can see it, but sometimes even if I stand in the middle of the room, no one acknowledges me. That's the elephant on the conversation. So when you're preparing for these conversations, know that it is not necessary to discuss every issue in one conversation. Not a good idea to go into your checklist and say, okay, these are what we're going to talk about today. Sit down, I've got a list for you. It doesn't work. You're going to meet resistance. And it's really a build-up over time. And that leads us into the second one. The earlier you talk about these things, the better. Because you are building up over time, but these are essential that you have the conversation in a timely manner. So it's touchy. The reasons why the earlier the better, the more involved your loved one is in the process, the better. This is about their life, and I'll say this a few times. This is about their life. Yes, you're impacted, very much so, but you want to know what their wishes are, and you want to be able to honor their wishes. And I know one thing I always told people when I would go into the home, we want to know what you want. And that's why we have to have these discussions. So you can have a voice. And even if you're not able to voice what you want at some point, you've already said what you want. That's one reason advanced directives are so important. Are you guys all familiar with advanced directives? The living will, power of attorney, those sorts of things. It's so important to have those in place. And that's another hard conversation to have. But we want you involved in the process. And that gives the power back to your loved one. It's not you making the decision, it is their decision. It's better to have a plan than respond to a crisis, even if the plan's so. Sometimes our best laid plans, we have to respond to that crisis. But if we have things laid out, we have a plan, we know what to expect, we can try. The stress of knowing the conversation needs to occur and putting it off is not healthy for you or your loved one. Have you ever had that, oh gosh, I need to talk to somebody about something, and it eats at you and eats at you and eats at you? You had those experiences? Most likely, if you're thinking you need to have the conversation, they also know the conversation needs to occur. Because that's one of the biggest misconceptions. They notice something's up. they know that things are off. They know they're losing their memory. They know that, I'm not able to do laundry as much as I used to be. Maybe I shouldn't be driving. I almost, I curbed the car pretty good the other day. There's things that people know are happening, and it's stressful for them. And sometimes they just need to talk about it. They just need to process how scared and sad they are. They're grieving. You're grieving. Everybody's grieving. But nobody's talking about it's that elephant in the room again. So just the stress, it's eating everybody alive. Get it out there. So, we're here to have these conversations. So many times I hear people, well, we want it to be in a neutral, safe location, so let's go to Cracker Barrel. Okay, well, Cracker Barrel is great for tea and biscuits, but it's not good for a conversation like this. I actually switched my points, but it's going to be an emotional conversation. There's no way around it. So you need to respect all those involved. A public place such as a restaurant is not the best idea. They're noisy and they're full of distractions. So if we have a tendency to want to avoid these conversations, so if we're really distracted, we can avoid it.
So,
Yeah,
in my opinion, it would be best to have it in their home where they feel safe.
absolutely.
I mean, not in my home where they were off base, but
Right.
in their environment. So at least that's off the table, and public places is silly anyway, but.
Yeah. But you'd be amazed. You'd be amazed at how, and that takes away, it's our own insecurity. Like, we gotta have it in a public place, and, we don't want anybody to fly off the handle. It's okay, those are human emotions. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about safety here in a minute, if somebody does fly off the handle. But yeah, I think their home is the best bet. Sometimes because of the circumstances, these conversations are had in nursing homes or the hospital, because somebody's fallen and broke a hip, or, there's been a crisis and somebody's in the hospital. More often than not, these end-of-life conversations happen in the hospital. But the good thing about those are you have the assistance of a chaplain, the doctor, the social worker, all there at your disposal. So you can integrate those resources into your conversation. But yeah, I think their home is the best place. So, and I mean, this seems ridiculous too, and I threw text in there too. It's not unheard of. We hear more and more all the time about people breaking up or asking for a divorce over text. It's going to happen. If it's not happening now, which I'm sure it is happening now, it will. And think about how much you lose in conversation through a letter, an email, a text. You don't get the body language. You don't see the pain your loved one is experiencing. You don't show them the pain that you're experiencing and how difficult this is for you. And I said again, don't be afraid to be vulnerable. This isn't about you, but it's okay to show that you're grieving. I know when I've had to have conversations with these people as a professional, I'm not the family member. I'm a professional. I'll go in. They're hard conversations for me. I'm looking at someone and saying, you're dying, or you probably can't go home. And to look at their pain, I know many, many times I was teary-eyed. My rule of thumb was never to get to the point where they were spending more time comforting me than I was comforting them. Then I've overstepped a boundary. It's a little bit different when you're a family member, but still, remember, this is about them. Choose a place that's comfortable for your level of express emotions and be vulnerable. Again, I think I agree that the home is the best place. Ensure safety. If you believe you or your loved one may be in danger, remove as many risks as possible. If you believe that, there have been times, thankfully, it's the exception and not the rule, that people become very angry and very threatening, particularly when there are memory issues involved, sometimes when there's not memory issues involved. We live in a place, we're Southern Indiana, we've got firearms. I know, I live in Greene County. Monroe County doesn't seem to have as many, this doesn't seem to have the gun sitting next to the chair. But, so I was never afraid of these situations when I was sent to a home. But some of our surrounding counties, there's guns next to the chair, you know? And you walk in, and there are people in town that have this too, but it can become threatening. So if you think that the situation can become threatening, make sure that you're safe and that your loved one is safe. Also, you're talking about things that might cause some depression in people. There's a very high rate of suicide in our elderly folks. I have a slide with more detail on this later, but oh, it's okay. No, it's actually, I put it towards the end because I wanted to really emphasize it. But
all those topics, money, driving, staying at home, impact independence.
Absolutely.
We all want to be independent. We don't want to be dependent on someone. We don't want to cause our kids more grief, and because we've raised them to be independent, we shouldn't be draining them.
And I've heard many times. I worked with the ALS population for a while, and I heard many times, when I get to the point that I can't wipe my own butt, I'm killing myself. When I'm dependent on someone else for my personal care, I'm killing myself. And it was very definitive. And a lot of times there was a plan. Mobility became an issue, of course, but a lot of people would think about overdose. It becomes your responsibility then as a caregiver, make sure the medications are in a safe place, make sure they only have enough for what they need that day, or the next day, not enough to overdose. Your approach in having these difficult conversations. Be honest with yourself and examine your motivations. Why now? Why does this conversation need to occur now? What's happened? What's going on? Every situation is unique. There are no two situations that are the same. There are common themes, but every situation, you're unique, your loved one's unique. What now? Why is your gut saying now this needs to occur? Or maybe it's not your gut, maybe it's blaring signs. What are you afraid of? Why aren't you having these conversations? Okay. Yeah. What's the worst thing that could happen if you have these conversations? And what's the best that can happen? I will be very honest and say the worst thing rarely happens. The best thing rarely happens either. It's somewhere in the middle. I would often have, what would happen in hospice care, home health care is usually the nurse or the physical therapist will go out and see patients first, and they'd be like, oh, you have to go back out to the home. As the social worker, you have to go out there. They aren't happy. This is a terrible situation. They have the worst news ever. You have to go out there and you have to diffuse this. I'd go in and we'd sit down and talk, and I'd be like, this is the worst situation ever. What are they talking about? One, the blow had already been delivered. And two, they needed someone to listen to them. They needed someone to hear them. So oftentimes if you're with your loved one and you really listen to what they're saying, listen to their emotions, let them know you hear them, you're not going to have the worst case scenario. It's actually going to be better than not. And again, going back to one of the earlier slides about these conversations don't have to happen all at once. You can plant the seed and the seed grows. So you get a little bit at a time, and it doesn't feel like such a big blow. When you go in with your list and say, this is, what we're gonna check off today, this is what you need to know, this is what we need to fix. They don't have time to absorb it. So, be empathetic, put yourself in your loved one's shoes. Ask what their wishes are, ask them how they feel, ask them what they're afraid of. And then going back to the, don't say, I know how you feel, because unless you've been there, you don't. You can say, this has to be really hard. I know this must be really hard for you. This is hard for me to talk about this, but I know this is hard for you to hear. Acknowledge their pain and let them know I'm here for you. And listen. Give them time to express what they're feeling. And again, I said this earlier, I'm jumping all over my slides. Put yourself second. It's not about you, it's about your loved one. And again, resist the temptation to put a plan together and present it to your loved one as the plan. This is what we're going to do, and you don't have any choice. This is just, tomorrow you're moving into Shady Acres, and so-and-so is going to be your roommate, and I will visit twice a week. No. If you want resistance, you'll get it there. Okay. Who should be involved? Everyone that can be, that's going to be part of this should be involved. This is going to be a variable in every situation. Obviously, your loved one needs to be involved. They need to be the center of this conversation. If you have siblings, children, whoever is going to be part of the caretaking, whoever is going to share this, needs to be involved. It might be a good idea to have a meeting beforehand with the caregiving team. Actually, it would be a good idea to have a meeting beforehand with the caregiving team and make sure you're all on the same page. Because if you're fighting and there's conflict there, you're going to present something totally different to your parents, your spouse, your whomever. So the caregiving team needs to be together. You don't have to agree 100%, but come up with a plan knowing that the plan may fluctuate a little bit before going into this conversation. One issue that I was involved in, when my grandmother passed away, I wasn't, I'm a family social worker, so everybody kind of comes to me for this kind of stuff. I wasn't very closely involved with the rest of the family stuff. They live out of town, family history stuff kept me from being an integral part of her caregiving. I go up to the hospital because they called the family to the hospital, and everybody's talking about what to do, what not to do. And I had a conversation with every one of my aunts and uncles and cousins as we were all sitting in the waiting room, like, what do you think? What's your opinion? I wanted to assess really quickly where everybody was, because then the opportunity opened up for me to then have a conversation with my grandpa, because everybody still looked at me because I was the professional. But I also felt like I needed to make sure that everybody was being heard, because I didn't want my cousin Jason, who wasn't the professional, to feel like he was left out in the conversation and if he was going to be involved. So, who's the boss? As long as the person's confident, they're able to make their own decisions. We may not agree with their decisions, but they are their decisions. Always be respectful. These are their decisions and their lives. As long as a person is confident, as long as a person has the ability to make their own decisions, they get to make their decisions. We may not agree with them. They may not seem safe to us. A lot of times they aren't safe, but it's their decision. And we find a lot when we're standing outside looking in, they would be so much better if. Maybe not.
But if they're miserable. in some cases, absolutely miserable. Maybe you wouldn't do that.
Some ways to start the conversations. Have you guys had to do these, have these conversations before? Most of us have had to have these conversations of one aspect or another. The conversations that make us comfortable that we don't want to have. But I mean, this isn't with my. I've had to have these conversations obviously too. But even the conversations about the birds and the bees with my kids, those conversations are not comfortable. Well, so how do you start these conversations? Small talk. Just let's talk about you today. How are you doing? How are you feeling? How did your doctor appointment go? Did you say anything new? Using the examples of other, this can be a great opener. I know when I'm with elderly family members, this is the topic of conversation. You know, my neighbor or my friend from church or whatever, I mean, it suddenly becomes what's happening is the injury that someone else has or that somebody's death. So, you know, I heard John Smith fell and had to go to the nursing home. Have you thought about what you would want if something like that happened to you? Or they talk about, you know, Susie, well, I hate to hear about Sue Jones's death. I talked to her daughter, and they never talked about her wishes from when she died. We've never talked about those sorts of things either. I think it's important to know what your wishes are because I want to honor them. Great ways to lead in the conversation. Let them teach you. Dad, I've always admired how you and Mom have handled retirement. What has worked well for you? I want to learn from you. What kind of planning comes next? Again, putting it in their, putting the ball in their court, letting them be in charge. Okay. Driving's a biggie. A lot of times people will just say, well, I just took their keys. We didn't have a conversation, I just took their keys. I just disabled the car. That's common too. I just disabled the car. We didn't talk, I just went out and disabled it. They can't drive it. Because it's disabled. I'll tell you that the taking the keys doesn't work because there are 6 more sets of keys hidden somewhere. We found that out in my husband's grandfather's family. I don't know how many sets of keys the man had, but he had lots of keys. So taking the keys doesn't work. We talked, I mean, and you, Richard, you mentioned this before. Every one of these conversations deals with losing something. Every one of these conversations deals with taking away their independence. Driving and losing the ability to drive, you become dependent. I know, you know, after my C-section, I couldn't drive for a little while. After, if I'm on a certain medication, I can drive, you know, 2 or 3 days, and I'm going crazy. Saying you can never drive again, I'm not going to be happy. It's a link to social connections, especially for folks who live in rural areas and don't have neighbors and friends nearby. If your loved one lives out in the middle of a 100-acre woods, they're going to be very, very, very isolated. And when you take the keys, when they're used to going to McDonald's every day, or when they're used to, you know, going to Kroger to pick up their groceries, even if it's a gallon of milk daily, that's their social outlet. Even going to the doctor's office becomes a social outlet, and you're suddenly dependent on someone else to take you in someone else's schedule. Those decisions, like you can't make your own doctor's appointment anymore because you're dependent on Jimmy's schedule to see when he can get off work or when he has time to take me or when he's not doing this, this, and this. It's hard. It's hard. Oh, it's okay. Okay. Have you guys had to have those taking the keys conversations? Would you say it's one of the most difficult conversations you've ever had?
My aunt was the one I had to deal with. They all know my stubborn, never marry, always independent aunt. She was the one that
You
took
could manage
care
it, nobody else.
After the stroke, I said, well, I'll go out with you to drive, and discovered it was bucket seats, and I couldn't reach her brake pedal. It was scary. Talked to her, the car was out for repairs time or two, she was just going to buy a new one. And found out later that she was sneaking off in it once in a while with her sister, who couldn't see.
Yeah.
We never quite accomplished that with her, even though I tried the conversations with her. I didn't actually take the keys or take the car. That's what would have taken in her case. My mother gave the keys to my brother, says, get the car out of here, or I'll be tempted to drive. That's what you want to happen. It
Yes.
doesn't always happen that way.
And it does sometimes though, and wow, what a relief.
And we have a combination of the two. My mother gave, I suggested after she totaled her car that she not get another one. She did anyway. But when she turned 80, she said, I'm not going to drive anymore, and she gave the car away. But she's now going to be 82 soon, and we're still having a conversation because she's not happy about it.
Right. Yeah, because what you've probably seen is, oh my gosh, I've given the keys away because I was making a smart decision, but I'm stuck.
I'm stranded. I'm not independent. Yeah.
And those were her, the hardware store, the grocery, those were the
Seniors.
Yeah. Yeah. You know the cashiers are happy to see you. Yeah. But I mean, the once a week haircuts that are at hair appointments, the hair setting. I know my great grandma used to, it was as religious as church. You go in and you get your hair set once a week. Yeah.
The trip to the bank is a social interaction. I've watched it in a lot of this as branch manager. I mean, for many people, that is one of their multiple social interactions.
Well, and I've had bank tellers tell me the same thing. Like if John Smith doesn't come in this week, I'm worried.
Yeah.
I'm checking the obituaries. I'm trying to figure out what's going on because he's here every Wednesday at 10 o'clock, and he stands here at my
And I know about his grandkids, and I know about,
Yeah. I have a friend who works for the cell phone companies, and she went and had coffee with an older gentleman one day because he would just come in and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And she's like, well, I gotta get to work, but why don't we just go have coffee sometime? Because that's the social interaction.
in some cases, a place like the assisted living in Beltrace, there's social days on there. There are ladies playing poker or euchre or something, and whereas when they're not, they can still live independently, still in their home, then they're isolated.
A lot of times too, if you can get somebody to go try out those social activities for a period of time, then the idea of going to a home, because let's face it, even if you're talking about going to independent living apartments, it's not home, so it's going to a home. But if you can get someone to do that and go experience that for a while and see that there is more social interaction, they kind of like that.
They can go and complain about how their kids put them there with the other people who say
Exactly. Yeah. Hey, it's our common bonding. Ungrateful children. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the don't take it personally. Like, it's not about you. It's very, very hard to not take it personally. But your parents had to make tough decisions when raising you that they didn't want to make. They had to say no to things they didn't want to say no to. Sometimes you have to, because they loved you. I love you. But it's the same thing, because you love them. Sometimes you have to say, make these tough decisions. End of life decisions. I put the right to know up here because we live in a culture, and this is changing, but it is still very much the thing, that we make decisions for people about life and death. The doctors sometimes don't give us all the information. Sometimes we don't know the questions to ask. sometimes we don't want to ask those questions because we're afraid of the answers. We have the right to know as much as we want to know. But we have to be empowered to ask this question, make that information. Sometimes for folks, they don't ask these questions because they're afraid to upset the rest of the family. I can't tell you how many times, and it goes back to the elephant in the room. I go into a home for hospice care, and the family says, don't tell mom she's on hospice. She doesn't know she's dying. Use the word healthcare provider. A lot of times we have to throw our name tag. We can wear our name tags in because we didn't say hospice on it. We didn't want mom to say hospice. We could see hospice because she knows what that is. Great lengths were taken to not reveal our identity. We go in, okay, that's fine, you know. I'd go in with the patient, we'd be talking and she'd be like, honey, I'm dying, but don't tell my kids, they don't know. I'd be like, somebody's not talking. Because everybody knows, but somebody's not talking. Patients know. Your loved ones know. They may not know how imminent it is, but you don't know how imminent it is. People know. Ask them what they're, give them the opportunity to talk about. And are advanced directives in place? Who's making these decisions if they can't make them? And what are the goals? Quality or quantity? When my mother-in-law passed away, she dealt with cancer for almost 10 years. And for the first several years, it wasn't a conversation of quality versus quantity because it was going to be quantity. We're going to go through it. We're going to get through it. And the first several were quality, and then it spread to her brain, and she had total brain radiation. There wasn't a lot of quality after that. She developed a dementia. You could have a conversation with her and 5 minutes later she wouldn't remember it. When it really occurred to me, they were in Florida with us. And she called her mother at least 3 times within an hour because she hadn't talked to her yet today. And I'm like, oh, she doesn't remember anything. The short-term memory's gone. Finally, when she wasn't able to walk anymore, she was barely eating. It was very clear to me that she was dying because I'm in the business of dying. I mean, I work with hospice people all the time. I know what it looks like. When it was very clear to me that that's what we were looking at, she went to the doctor. They did yet another scan. And they found, oh yeah, she does have some more lesions in her brain. What we could do is we could put a shunt in her brain and deliver chemotherapy directly to the tumor or to the lesion. Thankfully, she was still with it enough to say, no way, we aren't doing that. But because we trucked through for so long and hadn't had these conversations, she was never able to say how far she wanted to go. And honestly, had we had these conversations a lot sooner, I can't even, honestly now, I would have to sit and count of how many different treatments she had. You know, it is, always recognize that these things aren't signed in stone. You can say, I'm not doing any more treatments, but then when the option comes, you can do another treatment. I know, and I'm assuming most hospices are like this, I know when I worked for IU Health, hospice, it was, if you signed on for hospice and then decided you wanted more treatment, it was an option. You could revoke hospice and go back and get more treatment. That's a misconception about hospice, that once you sign, it's forever and ever, but you can revoke. And I'm assuming most other hospices are because they don't have to follow the same rules. But, you know, when you're looking at quality over quantity, what does the goal become? Is your goal comfort? Or is your goal to live a little bit longer and be in pain.
This may be a question that you really can't answer, but, so we've had some of this particular topic we have discussed, and to the point of my parent, it's my dad who I'm thinking about, but my parents, went and saw an attorney, wrote everything up. This was years ago when there was another health issue coming up, and everyone was cognizant, we had the discussion and everything. But now, we're finding, as my dad has lost ability to make decisions and remember and things like that, we wanted to make sure we had everything in place. So we called to make sure, are we really down as do we really have power of attorney? Do we really have this? And it's all written down, but we found that the copy that was my parents' copy of their living will and things like that had never been signed. So that it was discussed with an attorney and discussed with family members, and we know what he wanted at the time. But what do you do then? Do you go back to the attorney? Do you try? I don't think he could sign his name. He might be able to put a mark down. We know that's what he wanted, but right now he couldn't make that. He couldn't confirm that.
Does he understand?
So
Mentally, is he able to say, this is what I wanted?
I don't
You
think
said
so.
you can. Okay.
I haven't tried again to have this
Yeah.
conversation, but we're really at the point of having very short couple of turns and not about things like this. But so what do you do then? Do you go to the legal system and say, well, what do we do now? Because that's what the intention, if the intention for us is just wanting to make sure what he wanted is in place.
Right. Are there arguments among family members about what he wanted?
No.
You can consult with the legal system. Ultimately, it's probably a good idea. But also, if there are no arguments and no resistance, I would go with what he wanted because it's there in writing, even though it's not signed. Advanced directives, the power of attorney is really the only document that needs signed and notarized. Everything else, I've heard, when I did training on it, and I don't know if something's changed, Dana, you might be able to.
So there's a couple of things I would say. One is I would say definitely go talk to the lawyer if that person's still around, because if the power of attorney section especially isn't signed,
Right.
you're going to want that signed because it will give you legal right if there's medical decisions, financial decisions, those kinds of things to make. If that person was there and it was witnessed, I don't know if that's something that they could go back and do, but they certainly could tell you what to do. If it's like an advance directive or something like that that's not a legal order, I would say to use that to guide family conversations. I don't necessarily know that you need a lawyer for that because it's not a legal document, it's not an official medical order. Something that you might think about, though, is that if he, I don't know him, so if he is in a place where a physician would not be surprised if he died within a year, he can, you can also speak with the physician, you can review those documents with them, and you can fill out what is called a post form, because Indiana is now a post state, which is a physician's order for, what's that? I always forget.
Oh, that doesn't sustain.
No, physician's order for, I'll come back to it. Anyways, it's a legal document that talks about the things that are in the advance directive as well as other things. And it is a physician order that follows the patient in or out of the hospital. So those advance directives, if they have one and it's written on their chest, if an EMT finds them down, they can't go by an advance directive. If there's a post order, even the EMTs have to go by that. And that is based on the conversation with the patient if able, and if not able, with the family member who's in charge.
And thank you, I'm going to do that. What if you don't have any of this prepared? What happens, is there like a certain...
Yeah, it is a mess. It is a
Isn't
mess.
there just a certain way it's done? Like, does it automatically go to the spouse? Or is it...
No.
it
In the
has
state
to
of
go to
Indiana,
the
unless
husband?
something's changed, everyone in the family has equal say.
Yes, isn't that horrible?
So if your cousin Joey,
Everyone in
yes.
Siblings,
parents,
adult
kids,
children.
and let me tell you where this gets really messy,
Horrible.
is when, not like it's messy enough in a nuclear family, but when you have like stepchildren and
It's totally awful.
second wife.
That's why it's so important to get that
Yeah.
stuff signed.
Yeah, it is a mess. It is a mess.
Just so you know, you have
Oh, gosh, it went that quickly?
It's a really important conversation. We can
Yeah.
talk about most more later.
Yeah, there's a lot of this, okay, go on then. What happens if your loved one refuses to participate? If the situation is not a safety issue, it's okay to put it on hold. We mentioned this earlier, you can go back again. Respect that your loved one can't do it right now. You planted the seed, it's gonna be there growing. Respect that, okay, we'll just do this later. Again, don't go with your checklist, we have to do this now. Make sure your loved one knows you're on their side. You want the best for them. That's why you're having this, because you love them, not because you're trying to dig a bullet. Be an advocate. You can keep researching options, gathering information, making sure you know what's available, even if it's been tabled. Again, don't prepare a report and bring it to your mom and say, hey, this is what we're doing, but make sure you know what the options are. You may discover something, things are changing all the time. You may discover something that you didn't know the first time you came to the conversation. When safety is a concern, get a mediator involved. Seek help from your loved one's physician, spiritual leader, social worker, therapist, or local case manager. Let someone else be the bad guy. So many times, especially with the driving issue, doctor says we can't do it anymore, I'm sorry. The doctor tells them, you can't do this anymore.
You gotta find the right doctor, someone
Yeah.
willing to get involved.
Some of them don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Community mobility.
Yeah, Liz is talking about that down the hall, so if you want her PowerPoint.
There is, yeah, does IU Health still do occupational therapy driving evals? Okay.
Yeah, she's here.
There are driving evaluations.
There's information about the
So-
driving evaluations on the resource too.
Yeah.
She can't have that information.
Public information.
My family would probably take my keys from me right now. If your loved one talks about killing themselves, they have a plan and access to a method, get help. They may be mad at you, but this is a serious threat. If they say, I'm going to shoot myself, and they have the gun next to them, and you take that seriously. They're going to be mad, probably. They'll get over it. Their life is more important at this point. This is where I tell you intervene. This is trump their right to make their own decision. Remove the trigger if you can. Remove the firearms, remove the knives, remove the pills, whatever they say they're going to do. I don't like the idea of jumping right on the 911 call, but if they refuse to go, because the 911 call is often traumatic, but if they refuse to go, you call 911. Remind your loved one you love them and you don't want them to harm themselves. Remind them that you will work with them to develop a plan that is satisfactory to everyone. Don't forget to care for yourself. This could be a whole nother all-day topic. Find a trusted friend, counselor, spiritual leader that you can process your emotions with surrounding these conversations. Get good rest. Eat a healthy, balanced diet and exercise. Yeah, I know we all laugh at that. We're all terrible at doing that for the most part. But it's very important to care for yourself when you're a caregiver. Any other questions in the 30 seconds we have left?
A minute and a half.
Okay.
Now's your chance. Ask that question.
Thank you, Heather.
All right,
Appreciate you
thanks so
being
much.
here.
Sure, and I'll leave a little bit of my information here too.
Yes.